I'm taking you today on my favourite non-Barney photo walk. This is the place I come to when Sir Barkalot is not with me. The family have once again claimed him. That seems to be the measure of school holidays. Can we have the dog today? Really? Well, he's usually my friend during the day. No, he's our friend now. Oh, okay then. So I'm walking alone, and I'm walking in sunshine, as Mark Cohen did not sing. But I tell you what, the jet stream has pushed up for a few days and allowed in some high pressure, he says, sounding like a weather guy. Let me make an opening sketchbook picture to show you where I am today. I went away last week, and I tell you what, with a bit of rainfall, a lot of rainfall, it's become very overgrown along this path again. The nettles look like they're ready to pounce. I do like a leading lines path though, so that's what I'm going to make my sketchbook of. Slightly underexpose it because there's more light at the end of the path than the start. What do we have? F4. Let's go to F4. There we go. And 1/2/5, 200 ISO. There we go.
Today on the Photowalk.
Embrace curiosity. It's the compass that leads to endless discovery.
Whenever we consume photography, all we see is the finished image. There's a whole bunch of experience that goes into just looking and being interested in the things around you. Sometimes you'll walk 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles, and you won't take a single frame. And that's okay. I'm just very interested in this world. I'm just fascinated by it.
That's Ian Howarth, my guest today, a documentary photographer, a thinker, an observer, definitely a man of curiosity, certainly somebody for whom the words inquisitive and curiosity or curious were invented. And yes, I do realise I've gone a little left field in the title today. Guilty as charged, Your Honour. Lock me up, throw away the key. I remember dear old Ron, not so much the old Neil, dear old Ron, my first subby when I worked in a newspaper. He was able to just come up with titles so easily, good 2- and 3-word titles. He'd have eaten this titling thing alive. I personally find it one of the trickiest jobs to do with this podcast. Titling is not my strong point. You don't say, Neil. It's the Photo Walk. You and I making some pictures with our cameras, our smartphones, sketchbooking the walk together, reading your letters and inspirational stories you've sent in. It's a show for hikers. It's a show for walkers. It's a show for photographers of whatever kind. A show for those who find escapism and peace away from the noise of this world, putting miles under our feet and making a picture or two to remind us of where those footprints were left. And today on the show, why always carrying a camera answers that opening quote, really, of embracing curiosity, which is a running theme of today. We visit a tree of life on 2 continents, and also a place in Canada I can't spell, let alone pronounce. Looking for the most handsome feathered friend on the planet and wish you were here. There's a very vulnerable and down-to-earth, honest answer to what's your why from one of our extra milers. Actually, this week, the honesty, the candid nature of vulnerability in some of the letters and what we talk about is extraordinary, including one about acceptance in a world that's not always very accepting, which sparks a couple of personal thoughts and memories, which I hope you'll indulge later on. Plus, it being the second Friday of the month, a street photographer and photography mentor, Valerie Jardin, is here with Visual Stories Part 3. This month, we're talking about that thing in the sky that lights up our photographs and our lives, but doesn't always choose to play nicely. And also because last week we didn't have an assignment, as I was on my travels, I've asked Valerie to set August's photo assignment, which works perfectly with what she's talking about in our conversation. It's like we planned it. Honest, it is. 393 episodes in, none of this would have been possible without some special help from our extra milers, and I do have a particularly strong extra mile for you this week, which I'll tell you about near the end of today's show. And also our friends at mpb.com, a website where you can safely buy and sell and trade used camera gear online and be a part of the circular economy, which for me has become a really important way to purchase, particularly because the good people of MPB land, and I've seen them working with my own eyes when I visited their UK HQ in Brighton. They're people and photographers who really do check the cameras and the gear coming in. Not just a cursory glance, not just, oh, that looks all right, but a proper check. So if you're buying, you get peace of mind and a 6-month guarantee. And if you're trading or selling, MPB send a courier to pick up your kit on a day you specify. For me, and I've said this to you before, it's Dave the courier round my way. And once Dave's taken that kit back to their warehouse and gone through the checks, or Dave doesn't do the checks, but the kit's gone through the checks. Dave might, I don't know, he's a clever chap. To make sure that it's been graded properly, you get paid into your account quick smart. mpb.com, it's a really easy to use website, and it's helping photographers to buy quality used kit or sell gear you no longer need to free up some cash and give other people a chance to go make some special stories with the kit that you once cherished. Go to mpb.com. Of course, I'll have a link on today's show page. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Although it's iced today. What? Get you, Neil, with your new Cosmo use of the famous, not so famous show flask. Garibaldi's. Now I can't check this one. Bad news. The local Say-Nos, as we call it, embracing my inner Aussiness, the local Say-Nos were completely out a couple of nights ago, so it's mixed nuts. Check. Walking shoes. Check. And sunscreen today, because we have that sunshine. Check. Let's walk.
The Photowalk.
On my way up to the walk today, I was in car and we were listening to the radio together, and there was a piece about Lauren James, who's an England footballer who got sent off in the last 16 match at the start of this week. So by the time you hear this, which might be a couple of weeks' time, you'll know what happened in the Women's World Cup. It'll be done and dusted, and you'll know the winner as well. But Lauren James, at the moment, in the press, well, not so much in the press, actually. No, to be fair, rewind, and on social media, has become a villain because of the way that she acted on a football match. It was a petulant moment of another number 7, David Beckham, number 7, many years ago. First of a couple of mentions, actually, not to be too much of a spoiler. But David Beckham, many moons ago, he was petulant on a pitch, got sent off. They were burning effigies outside pubs in Manchester of David Beckham. And he's well known for quoting, I'm pleased that when I got sent off in a World Cup match and the nation blamed me for not progressing further, that there was no social media at that time. Lauren James, unfortunately, does have to bear the brunt of social media. And I was left, and I've crossed this line myself. I know I've crossed this line myself. I am not perfect. Those who cast first stones or whatever that phrase is, no. I'm not whiter than white on this one at all. But I was reminded, and this sounds a bit strange, but we talk often about kindness. And social media is a part of what we do as photographers, or most of us as photographers. Not all, no, granted, but most of us as photographers. And even if you don't photograph as walkers, as hikers, social media is part of our modern day currency. And I was reminded, and it is a strange thing to perhaps compare, but many years ago, when our youngest, who's now 13, was born, it wasn't the easiest birth. Where are you going with this, Neil? No, bear with me. And I remember that Sam, I won't go into too many details, but there were stitches involved. And I remember it being it was a grim moment, and I certainly sat there holding Sam's hand, feeling completely useless, as only a man can do at that particular moment. I remember the stitches were being administered by a fairly new charge. And the overlooking doctor, or the observing doctor, or whatever the phrase is, I remember her saying, "Be careful now, there's a woman on the end of that needle." I'll always remember that. It's etched now forevermore. And I do think in the same way with social media. And as I see the comments coming out of just plastered across social media about Lauren James and that petulant moment. And it's coming from both sides of the camp, those who are England fans and those who are not England fans. And I'm reminded to say, although this probably won't reach anybody that's making that kind of comment, but remember, there's a human being on the end of that social media comment. And it was a discussion on the radio as I was driving here. I don't know, I wanted to share that. Look, it's a photo walk. We're supposed to be able to just bimble, as my good friend Mally would say, and sometimes mention things that come to mind. Right, first letter of the show. Come on, Neil. All right. Let's open with a letter from Jem, or Jan Erik Mostrom, one of our Denmark Land faithfuls. Although he's not in Denmark Land, he's 710 miles away, nearer to me actually. He's in a place called, and spell it with me class, Aberystwyth. The point where in geography class I would melt under my desk into a syrupy pool of "please don't ask me, sir" unworthiness. I was listening to episode 388, says Jem, the first of a few mentions today, it seems. There's a lot of jigsawing going on today, things fitting together with mentions. And note to self, make sure there's a link to episode 388 on today's show page. I will check. Anyway, I was listening to episode 388 while walking from the centre of Aberystwyth. Yes, I'm currently visiting Wales Land, says Jem, to a place where I'm staying. And there's a certain height difference involved in the travel. They have a few more hills in Wales than I'm used to. And I can only agree, as I'm listening to 388, with what Paul Choi says. The ordinary people in life are more interesting than the famous people. Although, Jem, if you're at a cocktail party with me and we meet a lot of famous people, don't repeat that. I wonder, by the way, digression coming up. Whoop, whoop. I wonder if famous people have degrees of famousness. I mean, my favourite actor would be a good example here. Morgan Freeman, The Voice. Who does he see as famous? Where's his next rung on the ladder of famousnesses? Similarly to Paul Choi, says Jem, I'm more interested in the ordinary people in the photographs I see, especially older photos. I can't avoid making up stories about the life of these people, trying to come up with some kind of story behind each person. And that very much happens when I take photos of people as well. I think about the people I see and I think about who they are, where they've come from, and so on. Unfortunately, though, says Jem, you see, I knew there was a but coming up. I find it really difficult to take photographs of people, and so it rarely happens. But here I am in Aberystwyth, mostly for work, and it's feeding time for my colleagues and I. So this evening, I found myself standing on the promenade, waiting for some Chinese takeout. I see you've gone the traditional Welsh route then, Jem. Observing the people who pass by me. And suddenly, I remember that I have my GR3X in my pocket. So armed with that, I decided to attempt to take some pictures of the people around me. Just being, well, people. I'm of course too shy to lift the camera to my face, but I managed to take a few photos at hip level that to me screams UK. I have my stories of the people featuring in these photographs, but I'll leave it up to you to make yours. I even make up stories about the animals I take pictures of. And when I saw the gulls in the pictures, and by the way, these photographs I'm referencing, talking about now, they are on the show page today. I couldn't avoid, says Jem, wondering if the gulls look at other types of birds and think, oh, God, complete amateurs. It's we, the gulls, who are in charge. We're the real birds in this neighbourhood. And I think you're pretty accurate with that, Jem. They do have a sense about them, don't they, gulls? You rarely see other birds when there's gulls around. It's almost like, come on, they've turned up, they're going to steal the football. Let's go somewhere else for a while. There's a certain get off my landness about gulls, especially in seaside towns. where, and I'm serious here, where since we're talking about Brighton today, and my guest Ian Howarth comes or is residing in Brighton at the moment. The gulls of Brighton, they are vicious. I mean, they essentially mug people who have their fish and chips, sit down near the prom or at the seafront, and then boom, your chip is gone before you can even take it to your mouth. Pinpoint precision and flaps of wings that put your eyebrows out of place. They are really vicious. I really enjoy taking these photos, though, says Jem, but I need to practice and get some decent results. But as a first attempt here, I'm pretty satisfied, and I would be as well. Today's show is about being curious. It's about being inquisitive. It's not about rules. It's not about who can take the best photo. It's about making a picture of what you see. And then later on you might have more to think about it, as it sounds like you do when you start to put stories into your pictures. Enclosed too, says Jem, a typical tourist postcard summer wish you were here of Aberystwyth. Anyway, the food's ready, must go. Important lessons for tonight. A, always bring some kind of camera with you. B, even if you only have 10 to 15 minutes while waiting for your food, you can at least take a few sketchbook images. Good night from the top of the hill. Thanks, Jem. And yes, as I say, the pic's on the show page, and it's proof that there's always some observing to be done wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing, even waiting for your Chinese takeaway. You don't necessarily need the mother of the forest tree, he says, throwing forward to the next item in a moment seamlessly. You just need your camera and your inquisitive muscles flexed. So thank you, Jem, for your letter. I guess by now you're back in Denmark land, unless you're still climbing down from that hill. I'm not quite sure. It's the Photowalk show of a Friday. You and me and a guest or guests. Actually, for the next couple of weeks, slightly different guesting going on because I'm on my travels again. What already, Neil? I did say it was a kind of a weird on-off travel couple of weeks coming up, but I don't want you to miss out on a show, so there will be a show. It's going to be guests what have particularly inspired me. That is a working title and not the official one. I look into the air and say to my subby Ron, don't worry Ron, my grammar will be better. Right. Oh, yes, I was going to say, if you have contributions to make, please keep sending them in, particularly the Wish You Were Here's, which we're about to come on to. Send them in, please, pictures and your thoughts to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. Please don't put borders around your pictures and don't include lots of watermarks, etc. I will, of course, be sure to credit you. That's only right and proper. So include any links that you would like me to use, like a website or an Insta, an X. See, I've remembered, X, a Flickr, a Vero, so on and so forth, etc. et al. We do have some Wish You Were Here's flooding into the studio. Actually, Kelly Mitchell has sent 3, 2 of which will feature on the show page today. Postcards from Grasslands National Park in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan. I told you. I know this place, but I just can't say it. It's a place name I've steered around in the past. I can't do that today. It's a beautiful part of the world to visit or actually live in, but I don't think I could personally move there for fear that I'd not be able to answer the simple question in life of where do you live? Where do you come from? I come sort of without going into a blind panic each time. Anyway, Kelly, your postcards are wonderful. She says on one of them, one of my goals for this trip was to photograph meadow larks, who are such handsome-looking birds with a beautiful song. I could take them all home, and I completely agree. Looking at your picture, I do. That bird there, is he just posing? I think he is. Straight out and out posing, isn't he? Look at him. Complete shameless behaviour. He's like the influencer of the bird world in this shot. He utterly knows you're there, Kelly. There's no doubt in my mind about that. There's even a touch of, get me best side, would you? This side. No, not the other one. Here we go. Look, I'll put my head up in the air. There we go. Extending. Now, press. Come on, Kelly, press. Far too handsome. The bird equivalent of, here's where things start to link together, David Beckham, or perhaps George Clooney, yes. And then a postcard, I wish you were here, from Lisa Brzezinski. And these postcards today are testing my worldly pronunciations. And I know that the tree I'm about to talk about has two pronunciations, depending upon your side of the pond location. You can have Baobab, or actually Baobab, or you can have Baobab, so that's three. And there's actually more, because there's an African... well, there's not just two, because there's many different dialects in the Gambia where we're going actually for our Africa retreat in January. And you see the I'm going to call it the baobab, if that's all right for the moment, where you see these. In Mandinka it's called situ, and in the Wolof tongue it's called boyi. Anyway, enough with the language lesson. This postcard from Lisa Brzezinski, it's on the show page today for episode 393. Hello, Neil. And greetings from Florida land. I recently discovered your podcast, and I enjoy listening to you and your guests during my early morning walks around my neighborhood in Claremont, Florida. Many thanks to you and Barney for keeping me company. Well, he's not keeping us company today, Lisa. He's off with the family today. I get more treats when I go with the family, he said, looking over his shoulder and doing a slightly more pompous walk as he went the other way. This past week, I visited the Central Florida Heat and visited Walt Disney World's Animal Kingdom, which is about 40 minutes from our home. I'm an annual pass holder and often head over to one of the parks to take my camera for a walk. It was so hot, though, this week. I left the Canon in the comforts of our home, and I ventured out instead with the trusty iPhone. Actually, on the Zoom live show that we had earlier on this week, Giles Penfound, my good friend Giles, former army photographer, he a documentary photographer. I say former, he's a documentary photographer. Was then, is now. I can see Giles looking over his ungull-flapped eyebrows there and giving me that look. But he talked about embracing your phone, because I realised there's other flavours available, not just the iPhone. It was a talk about and with the photographs that he's been making whilst he's been on this incredible adventure, the other side of the world, away from his family for 2 months. So, apposite timing. Each time, says Lisa, and every time I go to Disney, I think of my mum, who passed away nearly 5 years ago. Mum was a great, I like this expression, Disney play date. We made many trips together to the different parks and had so many laughs. And one of the last photographs I took of my mum at Disney was at the rear side of Animal Kingdom's Tree of Life, as you're walking towards Asia. This is my favourite side for photographs because of the foliage. Plus, you can photograph your subject without stray people in the background. Wish you were here, from Lisa Brzezinski. Well, Lisa, actually, this time next year, never mind wish you were here, I will be there. I feel fortunate, if not a little in need of making sure I do something for carbon neutrality, to be visiting this tree in Africa and your tree in America land next year. Now, I know the Tree of Life that you photographed, which is incredible, in Disney World, is a 145-foot incredible. Have I used incredible? Can I use it twice in a sentence? Ron, twice in a sentence? I think the bird's answering for you. That'll be a no then. Anyway, it's got a magic of its own. And clearly for you, Lisa, a personal connection as well. And when you visit the show page, just look at that tree. I mean, it's an art installation, really. It's a breathtaking 145 feet. So it's higher than, I think the highest they go is 100 foot, 30 meters. Is that 100 foot? 8,000 branches on this one, lights up at night. I mean, I don't know how my other listener feels about Disney World, but I remember visiting when the kids were just on the okay side of hearing "It's a Small World" 1,000 times during that boat trip and the famous ride, and me being a dusty-eyed old dog just living out his childhood. But this time, in 2024, Lisa, the kids are completely the wrong side of enduring what they call the water torture of hearing "It's a Small World" after all, convinced it'll become an earworm for the rest of their holiday. And they've opted, they've put down their requests to go and watch gators attacking tourists in airboats. Are they fan boats or airboats? In the Everglades instead. They watched a TikTok video and it showed a huge alligator get on board one of these airboats. And listen, here's that moment.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh God! Oh my God! God, no! Hear your
So a note to self, do not sit at front of airboat. Sit on the second or possibly third, if there is one, raised up seat. As for the baobab tree, they grow to around about 100 feet in the wild, and in the Gambia they're believed to hold mystical powers. I did go and look this up. I didn't know this offhand, but I looked it up, and you'll find them at the center of many initiation rite ceremonies. And the leaves have long been used for medicinal purposes. If you have a toothache, not a problem. Munch on a baobab leaf. Because of its ability to stimulate the immune system, and I think this is scientifically proven, it's not unusual to hear it used for far more sinister nasties like treating malaria. And the fruit, you see, this tree, no wonder they call it a tree of life. This fruit that it has, now this is something I've experienced. It's used to make ice cream. And the baobabs in Madagascar store huge amounts of water. That's why they look like sort of stubby water towers. They are the most incredible trees. God's tree, or the mother of the forest. Other phrases used for it. Right. National Geo moment complete. Shall we meet Ian Howarth? Please, Neil. I thought you were auditioning for BBC Bristol's Natural History Department for a moment. It is a place I would love to have worked, that's for sure. I think Ian's succinct bio on the website does a good job, really. Ian Howarth is a documentary photographer based in Brighton. His work deals with themes of identity and culture. Ian sold out his first book, Arcadia, in 2019. He published his second this year, A Country Kind of Silence. His work has been featured in publications including The Guardian, The New York Times, It's Nice That, and Huck. And as you'll hear, Ian is very much a thinker, and he's got me thinking about the things I walk past every day but don't think to make pictures of. Although I'm improving on that note. Ian's also the feature of a Sean Tucker film that I will include on today's show page, and I had no idea our friend Sean was making this film. Not that it would have made any difference in terms of wanting to talk with Ian. It does, though, colour some of my questions, or steer them, perhaps, is a better turn of phrase. I said I wouldn't watch the film before talking to Ian, but just like a packet of open Garibaldis and a big brew, my willpower is utterly hopeless. So here's part one of my chat with Ian Howarth.
Brighton, Ian, seems to be a town, for me anyway, with many rich pickings for a photographer with a documentary leaning. But the story for you, though, it doesn't start in a seaside town in the south of England. It starts many thousands of miles away, and I've always wanted to say this, and I'm sorry, it's the Paddington Bear enthusiast in me, in deepest, darkest Peru.
It does actually begin in deepest, darkest Peru, yes. Which, that's where my story kind of begins, and potentially could have ended there. I could have very easily have stayed in Peru. My dad was English. He's sadly passed away now, but he had a real deep love of South America. He was an engineer, and he kind of went there with sponsorship of the British government, who were at the time kind of doing a lot for developing nations and trying to provide his expertise to the textile industry in South America. So he actually started in Venezuela, and then he wound up in Peru.
You actually moved to Miami, didn't you, as a family? So out of Peru into Miami, there was no...
Yeah,
and then this strange route back to Yorkshire, which is about as different as it comes, isn't it? Really, from those two places.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think my dad always had the idea to kind of come back to the UK. I don't think he necessarily knew how that was going to happen or when, but it seemed to happen at around the right time. I think my dad would have maybe liked me to have finished my secondary education in Peru and then come to university in the UK, but things kind of, moved a little quicker than that. So I ended up finishing middle school, as they call middle school in the States, there, and I started high school as well. So I was there for about 4.5 years, I think, in the end.
Miami, though, was an important place for, if you will, sharpening your sense and senses of inquisitiveness for the world, wasn't it? Those early visual steps, which for you, I think, meant hours on two wheels.
Yeah, I remember kind of riding my bike, and I would just ride my bike like everywhere. My parents, they'd buy me a bike, it would get stolen or whatever, and they would just buy me another one. Like, bikes have always been with me, like in some way or another. And I remember I used to just kind of get my bike and I would just ride in Miami, like neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood, and I would wind up miles away from where I used to live, and I just wanted to see what everything looked like. I wasn't going somewhere. I didn't have a specific waypoint. It was just randomly just following my nose. Oh, this looks interesting, I'll go down there. Oh, there's a lake over here, I'll go down there, or whatever. And I would just do this all the time. And I just wanted to see. Like, I didn't know what I was trying to find. I just wanted to see. That's as much as I know. So then I think coming to England, that fascination was kind of like doubled almost. By that point I had Peru, Miami, and then England to make comparisons with. So it kind of just blew my mind. So I would just love spending time on my own, just walking hills in Yorkshire, like just trying to see things. I just wanted to see all the time. So I think when photography came along, it just gave me a lot more purpose.
How did photography come along then?
I began my career as a cameraman, basically. I was interested in video, and I did that for many years. And, I had a DSLR, which I used for video, but I never really used it for photography. It was kind of a work tool for me more than anything. But then a friend of mine gave me his film camera. He just had it. And
this is the Olympus.
The Olympus, yeah. He just gave me this Olympus. He was going away. He was moving from England to live in Turkey, right. And he just gave me his Olympus OM1, and that's kind of how it began. I loaded it with black and white, began shooting a little bit, and I really loved it. And then there was a trip that I had planned to go to Peru. So then I basically just bought loads and loads of film, actually old cine film, which is kind of complicated to develop and whatnot. But, and that was me kind of with my film background or my video background. I was obsessed with like cine film and all of that stuff. So it was more of an exploration for me. But I think that kind of began the journey. Yeah. And from that moment, I basically never looked back. It literally, from that moment, it's always been a constant over the last kind of 8 years now. I can't remember not having a camera in my hand, pretty much on a daily basis.
Do you know, if I had a penny for every person that had said that the Olympus OM1 had started some form of journey from them, I'm sure I'd have 47.5 pence now. The half being from somebody who wasn't quite sure whether it was an Olympus or
if it was an OM1 or an OM2.
OM2, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's one of those. And oddly, the way it kind of landed in my hands wasn't the traditional route. Normally, it's like at college or high school that people that the school would.
That's true. Yeah.
Right, but mine was just a friend. It could have been any camera. It could have been a Canon or a Nikon or whatever, but it just happened to be an OM1. So. That's quite funny.
I hope, and I'm sure your friend appreciates entirely what a difference, what a change, what your life turned out to be thanks to his extremely generous gift.
Yeah, very. I mean, I actually very recently gave the camera back to him. He's actually he's actually an investigative journalist, and we're actually doing a project together anyway to do with that. I'm taking obviously care of the photography side of things, but he recently asked for it back, so. We met up in Spain, and I brought the camera with me.
You took that camera all the way to Spain.
So I found it was lovely. It was like, here you go.
I suppose as a DP, as a filmmaker, sort of scoping scenes, looking for places to film, and I would imagine that was handy training ground for a photographer with your inquisitive nature and eyes, because that's what you do as a filmmaker, isn't it? You're always scoping places. You're always looking for a scene, something that might make a good movie.
A good anything, yeah. A good location, you kind of just bagging them, and I've often found that some of the best camera people are the ones that do actually use photography as well. Many of the DPs that I know, they're all avid photographers, and I think it helps them, because it's a different way to work. They both kind of apply the same kind of rules in many ways. You're still framing, you're still using a lens with metal and glass, you're still recording an image onto a plane, whether it be digital or analog plane. There's a lot of rules that are the same, so it actually makes a lot of sense if you are someone that's trying to train your eye constantly to have a camera with you all the time. And photography, because it's frame by frame, it makes more sense to do that without actually having a storyboard or a plan to actually shoot something. So the stills camera can actually really, really help you with video. And obviously that's something that I don't know too much about, because my photography career started after I gave up doing video, really. But I can see now that, had I done both at the same time, it would have been a great asset to my career in doing both side by side.
I would imagine most people say that the reason why they feel that film suit or analog suits them is because of the process of slowing down, of thinking, being more measured. But I think it's more than that for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people, especially those that maybe don't understand film or have shot it that much, I think it's very easy to kind of like just to say, oh, you're just trying to be, jumping on the bandwagon or all of this and stuff. And I think maybe there might be an element of that. I mean, that's not how I see it. I think for me, film is something that is how I began my journey. Yeah. I always had a DSLR, but, I never used it seriously as an image making tool from a stills perspective. That's how I used my film camera. So for me, this is just always how I've done it. And now that I actually shoot a lot more digital stills, I still prefer the image on film. But obviously, getting your tastes aligned, it requires a lot of understanding of how film works. Some people are very, very old school. They only print. They'll go into the black and white darkroom, and everything they do from an analog perspective follows a 100% analog process. Whereas I don't. I still digitize my negatives. But the image begins in an analog process. But then obviously with that, you have to have good scanners to extract the image. There's no good spending £4,000 on a Mamiya 7 if you're using a £100 scanner. You're maybe extracting 10% of how good that negative is. So you do have to have good processing in the entirety of the process to actually make that image come alive at the end. And I kind of understood this. I'm an obsessive person. I just, anything that I do, I always become obsessed with it. Doesn't mean I'm any good at it, but I do become obsessed with the process. So whatever hobby I've had in the past, be it mountain biking or any sport that I play, I always try to figure out like, how can I get an edge? How can I get myself from the best possible springboard to actually make it the best experience that it can be. So, and it was the same with film. I really researched everything to make sure that I can really extract all the quality from that negative.
I loved the film that you made with Sean Tucker. I had no idea the film was being released. And actually, when I started thinking, right, I need to just write out some thoughts for questions I'm going to ask Ian, I did the one thing that I should never do, which is go to a film of somebody that I really admire and watch their film, because then you start sort of rolling out the questions that they may have rolled out. So, but I thought you came across beautifully within it. And as Sean's such a talented filmmaker, and the film definitely leans on nostalgia, and it's a question that I would bound to have asked anyway. That you have a leaning toward nostalgia. It's clearly something that floats your photographic boat. Why is that?
It's a tough question to answer. Yeah, I've got a lot of theories about this, not just from my own work, but also because of other people's work and other people that I see doing similar work to me. I think when you begin your journey, like when I began my journey, I didn't know anything about other photographers. I knew very little. I think maybe I knew who David Bailey was and Richard Avedon, and that was it. I didn't really know much about kind of Stephen Shaw and William Eggleston and Joel Meyerowitz. I didn't know these people. And I mention these people because these are the photographers that I found out about at the beginning of my journey. And you realize that this kind of photography is not about the finished image. When you're a photographer that's in the public sphere, or your work is there for public consumption, you notice that comparisons will always be there. And all I find people get, and this goes for me as a consumer as well, like it goes for every one of us. We're all consumers to some degree. But whenever we consume photography, all we see is the finished image. Yeah. Now, some of us will delve further and deeper to find out more about the body of work, what inspired the person, how long did it take them to do this, how difficult was it, what inspired them to do this. But I think the beauty about what Eggleston, Shaw and Meyerowitz did is that anyone could do this. You just needed to have eyes and a camera and a willingness to do it. And the beauty of it is that it allows you to see the world and start understanding things. The image just comes at the end, but there's a whole bunch of experience that goes into just looking and being interested in the things around you. So then you find that actually your life, rather than becoming I wake up, I go to work, and then I go to sleep. You can actually fill it in the bits in between with something really fun that actually allows you to enjoy just different parts of the everyday. And it allows you to enjoy things that people just don't really pay attention to. And that is accessible to everybody. It becomes something that is democratized in many ways. It allows kind of people to just go and do it. There's no fee for it. There's no hierarchy. You can literally, anyone with a camera can just go out and just do it. And I think that's why this kind of work is interesting. So leading on from that, you then begin to try and find the things that are just interesting. You don't just go out your front door and just start kind of spraying and praying, like that's not what you're doing. You shoot with a bit of intent, but you're not necessarily kind of building a really kind of complex body of work or telling a particular story. It's just kind of more general. But it allows you to be kind of creative and think about the world around you a bit more critically. And I think that's why it's appealing to so many people. And I think that certainly was the appeal for me at the beginning. Just the ability to just go out and not have huge concepts, but just allows you to just kind of like start training your eye in terms of how to shoot. And I think that's why Eggleston, Shaw and Meyerowitz are so appealing to so many young photographers and people beginning their journey, because it's very, very accessible to them.
I'm wondering whether your photographic training then was in fact those huge long cycle rides, with that at the back of your mind, perhaps not even knowing it at that stage, what you were observing cycling through parts of Miami you'd never been in before.
Right, exactly.
And these long 10-mile walks you still do today, I think.
I do them less. I do them less so now. Right. I don't do them as much as I used to. But I still do them. If I have an opportunity to do it, then I will do it. I'm actually going to Ireland in a couple of days, and
wonderful.
I'm probably going to be doing a lot of walking there, and I'm okay with that. I'm quite happy to just put the work in, because I know that is how I'm going to find the things that are interesting to me. Part of walking, sometimes you'll walk 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles, and you won't take a single frame, and that's okay. If you saw it all the time, it wouldn't be interesting. So I think that is the mark of a good photographer. I think it's being able to create a body of work where you're basically creating something that is going to give an emotional response of some degree, and sometimes you can achieve that with a single image, with a single strong image. But I think the mark of a good photographer is being able to convey an emotion from an idea that they've had that is shown to others with a series of images. How you do those images, it really is inconsequential. That's entirely down to the photographer.
You don't make busy pictures, or actually the language. Maybe the language I'm looking for is you don't make. They don't seem to me to be loud pictures. Not often, anyway. These are photographs that I do find are quiet through, and I know this has been mentioned in a few interviews and things that have been posted online about you, and it's true. And I probably gravitate toward your work because it's the kind of photograph that I enjoy being a part of. And I think that I'm choosing my words carefully here.
And that makes me incredibly happy. I'm always really happy to hear that. I think photography for me is just a language. You're kind of trying to just communicate something with other people. And I think if other people can relate to what you're doing, I think I think for me that is, aside from the selfish reasons why I have to do photography, I think that's probably like right next to it, is trying to find some common ground with other people. And it very much is a reflection of how I'm feeling whenever I'm photographing. I'm genuinely enjoying being in these quieter places that are kind of far from the bustle of modern society. These are places that are very much, away from all of that.
I would imagine that you really like to work alone. These are your times, aren't they? Your moments.
100%. I'm quite an annoying creature in many ways. I'm very specific about things. Certain things I'm very specific about. If I play you my favorite song, I don't want you to talk when it's playing. I'm one of those people, if you're talking through my favorite song, I'll stop the song, let you finish, and I'll rewind it again.
I think I need to know what that favorite song is now, so I never do it to you.
I don't actually have one. I've got many. My partner tells me that my favorite anything changes with every conversation that we have. So yeah.
I want to talk about some of your projects. Do you think in projects?
Yes. In a way, I think both of my books, both Arcadia and Country Kind of Silence, kind of in many ways, they both kind of snuck up on me a little bit. I think I was always shooting with some intent. definitely. I mean, both books were shot with intent, but I think their beginnings maybe didn't have the intent that they eventually got.
Yeah.
You know, it was very much kind of shooting in a very kind of automatic way, you know, and obviously A Country Kind of Silence kind of all happened during lockdown. So, you know, we were severely hampered by our ability to move and travel and whatnot. So it kind of began kind of like that. And then eventually the concept solidified. And then I thought about it a lot more in terms of my relationship to what I was doing versus what I'd done for the previous book, and found that actually it was very different, you know, and you know, I'm an overthinker, and the thing I overthink the most is me. You know, it's why I'm feeling this way, or why am I not thinking about this as much as I used to, blah blah blah. And I always try to work things out, you know, and I think obviously lockdown and that time and the pandemic gave me a lot of time to think about these things. So I think that was the process for that, which, as I understand it, it's not necessarily the process that most people have, you know, and I think my process is changing now quite a lot, you know, in terms of the projects that I'm doing now and how I'm planning them and how I aim to complete them.
One of the things I particularly enjoy about both projects is the exotic on your doorstep, which we often talk about. You don't have to travel 2,000 miles. I think I've even heard you say to Greenland in one of your interviews.
Oh yes.
You don't have. Well, it's nice to go to Greenland, I'm sure, but
absolutely,
you don't have to go there to make a project. Or in fact, let's not talk about the project. You don't have to go there to see.
I completely agree with that. Like for me, there's a lot of joy in just making things work.
Yes.
What can I do here? There was a certain level of idealism when I've said that in the past, you know, that, you know, you don't have to travel that far to take good pictures. And I think my whole theory on this kind of came undone when I went to Costa Rica like last year. I had a very specific project to do there, and I only had 2 weeks to do it. And I realized that 2 weeks was not enough to realize it in the way that I wanted. I just needed more time. You know, more time is always going to be very, very helpful. And I think depending on the kind of project that you're trying to do, some are very kind of dependent on weather and the time of year and whatnot. So these projects are a little bit different. But for me, in terms of the work that I've done up to this point, I think there's a great joy in trying to work things out kind of where you are, where you live. If you can't travel, make it work here. You know, take some of the pressure off and try and see what you can do. There's a myriad of projects that you can do in your hometown. You know, there's so many stories. There are so many stories there. There's so many stories that you can create images for, and there are so many stories that you can just create yourself. You know, there's a million narratives that you can get stuck into in terms of a photographic project. I think that's kind of how I've always seen the world. But if you do want to document, I think there's so much that you can do very, very close to home.
And Ian Howarth returns shortly, and we're going to talk about his new book, A Country Kind of Silence, and project work. Africa 24, as I mentioned it a little while ago, is still open for bookings. We're off together for, well, it's a real mixture of all kinds of things, this. In terms of experience, it's a holiday, it's a retreat, it's an expedition. It's all rolled up into one wonderful visit to the smiling coast of Africa, the Gambia, where we'll be spending time with the people of this incredible small country on the west coast. River trips and markets, wildlife villages, music, making documentary projects, experiencing the food. I wonder if we can find some Baibao ice cream. There we go. There's a challenge. It's a 10-day photo trip. It's guided by 3 experienced photographers and filmmakers. If you'd like more info, go to the link on the show page, which is on the menu of the Photowalk.show website. 4 places now confirmed, possibly a 5th coming up, actually. There just is only a handful now remaining. Right, July's assignment was a challenge, wasn't it? It was set by Alice Tomlinson, the documentary photographer, who asked you to find inspiration in a quote, which, the quote could have been a song, it could have been a poem, anything really. I don't know why I'm thinking something written on the side of a lorry, but why not? inspired by words that you've read, anything like that really, and then make or present 3 pictures to go with the words. And if you could and wish to do so, also write a short supporting story, and you delivered. So your triptych stories are on the assignments page, the July assignments page that is on the website. There's a few more that, as we speak, I am uploading. And in terms of story, here's one that really got me thinking for all manner of reasons, one of which is that we're not so far removed from living in less enlightened times, which I'm going to personally revisit in about a quarter of an hour, if you'll indulge. And this story, well, this is the winner of the famous not-so-famous flask, which, by the way, this particular famous not-so-famous flask is about to become a collector's item, because the new design for 24 is going to debut in a few weeks' time. So this story, which I want to read, it talks of prejudiced thinking, which sadly still exists in too many communities and countries. And you know that prejudice and the fear it caused is actually, even in what I like to think of as a more accepting society, i.e. where I live in the UK and where plenty of our other listeners live around the world, only a few decades separate us from a time where thinking was very, very different on the subject of the letter that I'm about to read out that went with the assignment. You know, one of the most extraordinary acting performances of all time for me was Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, which tells the story of a lawyer, an attorney called Andrew Beckett, who is played by Tom Hanks, and he goes to a personal injury lawyer, who's played by Denzel Washington, a lawyer called Joe Miller, to help him sue his employers who fired him after discovering that he was gay and that he had AIDS. And it doesn't matter how many times I watch this movie, I'm moved entirely by just how cruelly humans can treat each other, especially when acting out of fear and not having the courage to embrace difference. And you know my favourite phrase, whenever I say difference, my favourite phrase, vive la différence, where the Oxford Dictionary actually defines it as an exclamation or approval of difference between the sexes. And just keep that in mind while I read you this story that was sent in by Martin Pendry to go with his assignment. Taking action and not being a bystander was the quote from which he was inspired. A quote by Paul Choi, the documentary photographer. Again, you see, episode 388. Martin says, I recently listened to episode 388, where this assignment was shared, and it was followed by Paul Choi's inspiring talk about taking action and not being a bystander. The essence of the conversation was being proactive and ready to act when needed. Paul emphasised the importance of allowing people to have conversations, taking them on a journey of understanding, as he put it, even if they hold opinions that do differ very much from our own. And it got me thinking about my experience attending London Pride 2023 this year. Now, back in the 1980s, when I first started marching for equality, things were vastly different. Although homosexuality had been decriminalised, being gay was only legal within the privacy of one's home, and you had to be over 21 years old. After Pride, there was always the fear of losing your job or facing repercussions for being associated with the parade if you'd been spotted. I remember marching with an older friend who had endured a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And he represented all those who couldn't march openly due to the potential consequences that they would face. He'd march in a pinstripe suit, proudly, bowler hat and umbrella, and stated that he represented all the people who couldn't march, wearing a typical businessman's uniform of the City of London in the 1980s. Fast forward to now, says Martin, and I'm an osteopath, regulated by the General Osteopathic Council, the GOSC. This year, I had the honour of joining GOSC as they participated in the Pride Parade for their first time. Witnessing the progress made by the LGBTQ+ community, supported by our allies, is truly inspiring. Looking back on my long-standing involvement in Pride since the mid-1980s, seeing how far we've come really is nothing short of remarkable. And Martin's made 3 pictures to go with this story and his words. In the early days, says Martin, the queer community marched with trepidation, fearing the impact on their livelihoods and employers' reputation. However, we've evolved over time into an inclusive community that ensures nobody feels excluded. Engaging in meaningful conversations with diverse individuals has taught us the value of tolerance and acceptance. And while disagreements exist, we understand the importance of maintaining an open dialogue to find solutions, such as addressing concerns about transgender individuals in sport. As a gay man in the osteopathic community, I've mostly found support, even during the darker days of the HIV epidemic. So, I commend the GOSC for participating in the Pride Parade, reflecting their commitment to equality. And long may we have meaningful conversations to embrace difference. Difference, as I find myself, Martin, saying. And I'm going to say here, twice over, here. And I do want to add something, actually. I just want to add, whilst being careful not to partake in the very easy tabloidist rear-view mirror sport of Russia bashing, because it's not the everyday folk caught up in the voicelessness that they endure, is it? But a year, maybe two actually, prior to the lockdown in London, I covered a wedding, which you will never find on my socials. It will never be on my website, and it can't be, due to the nature of the story and their fear. But I covered a wedding for two Russian women, and one was actually a lawyer as well, and was, I think, beginning to campaign on this. I haven't had a conversation for a while, and perhaps this is a timely reminder, note to self, to make sure I do. And they came to London to get married, not that they could take any form of papers. It wasn't official in that respect, back to a town just outside Moscow, indicating such. So it wasn't for that, but they just wanted a day. They wanted a day. They wanted their day. They wanted to feel included. It was all about inclusion. It wasn't about legal papers. So there was a high degree of pomp and ceremony, albeit with, I think we had about 20 guests in the end. And after the ceremony, for some pictures, I suggested, because we were close by, that we would go to the embankment on the Thames. It's a very famous place to make portraits and photographs. And that was where I suggested that we walk so we could get some couple portraits. And I noticed that when we left the privacy of the ceremony room, that it all became, it felt to me like it was a bit more distanced. There was I suppose a professionalism involved to everybody being together. And for me, particularly when I make portraits, judging whether the couples are happy to do so, it's all about, I don't know, hand-holding and kissing and PDAs. And so we sauntered off, and this, by the way, is an odd reason, but it's still why I pay 3 times as much to go by a traditional cab in London, the black cabs, and not Uber. But with that in mind, we headed off to go and make our photographs by the embankment, and we got to, there's a traffic crossing just under, what's that big bridge? Is it Blackfriars, or is it London? I don't know. It's the one by Temple. By the Temple Tube Station. There's a crossing there. You know the one, don't you? No, I don't, Neil. I've never been to London. Well, there is one. Just take my word for it. And for those that have been to London, you know that one. Yeah? Is it a zebra crossing or just a straight pedestrian? Anyway, there's a crossing there. And we got to the crossing, and I said to the brides, I said, look, when you go across the road, hold hands, because I want to get a shot behind you holding hands as you essentially walk through the traffic that stopped for you, because we waited for a red light. So they tentatively held hands, and as they crossed the road, on the opposite side of the road, so looking back at us, a driver in a cabbie, a proper London cabbie, he had his arm out the window and he looked across at them as they walked across, and he went, "Oi, oi, girls, congratulations." That's my London cabbie impression. Not very good, I appreciate. But I tell you what, suddenly everything changed from the moment that cabbie had expressed that he accepted entirely who they were, what they were doing, and the experience that they were having the joy that they were hopefully feeling by getting married. And I think, I believe that they held hands even more firmly at that moment, and it became an entirely different shoot after that. And that's probably one of my most precious wedding moment experiences, made by a London cabbie, not by me, but by a London cabbie. And that's what inclusion is all about. Right. Come on, Neil, stop chuntering. It's the second Friday of the month. It is time to embrace our inner French spirit, where we can say Vive la différence as Frenchly as we like, and join street photographer and photography mentor Valerie Jardin for Visual Stories. It's part 3, and this month we're talking about, as I teased at the start, the thing that makes and breaks our pictures. And Valerie will be setting you a challenge today as well. So street walking shoes on, please. Here's Valerie with the accompanying pictures to what we're about to discuss on the show page today. So you can watch along and listen at the same time if you like, if you're not driving. Visual Stories, part 3.
This week, because we had no challenge last week, because there wasn't what I would call a regular program. There was an irregular program. If that doesn't sound a bit strange, but this week, because we're back into the whole throw of things, then I thought, well, second week is always Valerie, so why don't we also ask Valerie to set the challenge? We get 2 Valeries for the price of 1, as it were.
Hey, that's a good deal.
We've just been on our travels. We've been to Wales. Have you been on your travels too?
Yes, I was. Took the month of July off and family vacation back in Normandy, and so crossed the pond again. I'll be there again in a month, and then it was really nice, nice. I'm fine tuning the art of the grab shot, and we'll talk about that.
Well, that's what we were talking about last week. How much grabbing did you do while you were away, and were the family pleased with you grabbing?
Yes, because I honestly did not take any time, not a minute, to wait to fine-tune composition. It was all about fine-tuning on the fly. Right. And I really see the benefit of this. Right. First of all, I'm not stressed like I used to be years back. You know how stressful it is when you were hanging out with non-photographers and you can't take the time you need, especially for street photography, because there are opportunities all the time. Yeah. So now that I make it a challenge to just grab shots as I'm going, I mean, literally barely stopping even, it made my photography a little bit better because I have a quicker reaction time to the decisive moment. And I love it. I really, really see a great benefit.
Do you, though, and be honest with me now, do you steer the family towards places where you can make a grab shot? Because last week, as I say, we were in Wales. We spent a lot of time away from people. We purposefully chose to take walks that took us well into the countryside, much to the annoyance of my oldest. But it would have been no good for a grab shot of people. There's no doubt about that at all. And I'm thinking, oh, Valerie, would you be saying, why don't we walk in the town a bit more?
That's a good point. Well, a little bit, but we're never really far from people. But I did a lot of contemplative type photography as well. So I find that no matter where we are, I'm really doing my visual push-ups. So it's all good. Yeah. So I don't only photograph people. So and actually we went to the island of Jersey. I don't know if you've been there.
Yeah,
but
I have.
It's actually in the UK. I had never been there, although it's only, an hour from the Normandy coast. Yeah. And I expected a lot of tourism and I thought it would be packed, but it wasn't. Well, it was a Monday. It was just a lovely day. There were not a lot of people, but I really enjoyed. I did more contemplative type of photography than I did street. And I honestly, the first couple of hours, I thought, why did I even bring my camera? Because it won't be any pictures. I could do that with my phone. And then picture number 1 happened.
Well,
we'll talk about today.
And that's arrived beautifully at platform 1, which is our first picture. And actually, the picture that we're starting with, it dovetails very well into last month's subject, which was about the grab shot. This is a bit of grab shot, but the new subject that we have this week, or the topic of this week's conversation, is something that we all meet: difficult light.
So we walked into a pub in a tiny little town. We stayed away from the big town in Jersey.
Well, there's only
which
one
is not
St.
very
Helier.
big.
That's it.
St. Helier. We didn't even go there. We just we just arrived there and left.
Yeah.
But we went to a nearby little harbor town, which was lovely, and walked into a pub. So, okay, we're going to get the full British experience on this little island. And it was really empty. But, I always have my camera on my shoulder. And so we had, fish and chips and
Oh God!
the
How much more British can you get, Valerie?
I always figured you might as well, give me a pint and some fish and chips.
Yeah.
And then before heading out again to walk, I think we walked like 20K that day. We all used the restroom. So I can leave anything at the table with the company I'm with, whether it's on a workshop, it's my students or family. I leave my bag. I leave my most precious belonging, but I'll always take my camera to the bathroom. Why? Because whether you're in a cafe in Paris or a pub in England, the restrooms are usually in the far back or downstairs, right?
Yeah.
So I always take my camera because that gives me the chance to scan my surroundings on my way to the toilet. And then when I come out, then I'm ready. I'm like, okay, there was one person that was sitting there, this one woman with a book and the glass of wine just by herself. But I figured, when you have a good book, you're never really alone.
Yeah.
And she was backlit, but it was very, it was a sweet moment. So I came out, grabbed the shot, and then went back to my table. And don't be afraid of backlight situation.
But there's lots of light difficulty going on.
There was enough light.
But there's backlight, but you're also balancing it beautifully with the light bulb that is to the top right of the picture.
Yes. So I was kind of limited. I couldn't back up any more than I was. I was literally coming out from the doorway and I didn't have much space. I'm shooting at 23, so I kind of knew what I had to work with. And I knew she would be mostly in rim light, but there was a door open behind her, so there was light coming from there. So it was very moody. The light on the glass worked well. There was nothing beyond that window, just another building. So it's blown out highlights, but who cares? There is nothing there. Never be afraid of blowing out highlights, by the way.
I was going to ask you, do you worry about that? But obviously
never.
No.
Whenever I see photographers with the blinkers, the flashing light on the blown out highlights, I'm like, well, no, in street photography, you better not have that because sometimes you want to blow out highlights.
Yeah.
In a silhouette situation, for example, you don't want distractions behind the person. Sometimes you want the background to be properly exposed behind a silhouette because the background can be important if it's a Paris monument or whatever, and far in the distance. But if it's a car or something else way back, well, you might as well blow it out, right? So at least I had one picture on Jersey Island, and I was quite pleased because that was pretty much it. The opportunities of street photography were few and far between.
Well, the next one really did challenge you. Now, you'll need to go to the show page to see these. This is made what looks like in the midday sun of Barcelona. One pair of legs, one dog. There's a lot of light at the bottom, but nothing at the top, is there?
Absolutely. And I like that we can keep the shadows really deep. There's one thing that people consistently do is bring out details from the shadows. I know we can. We have the tools to do that, but it's usually kills the mood. So deep shadows are great. So I usually just do that with exposure compensation when I approach a scene where I want the shadows to stay deep. Of course, you can tweak that in Lightroom. But here, the narrow streets of cities such as Barcelona is where you'll have a little bit of light, really deep shadows at certain time. And I just love those situations. I think light can be so fun and exciting, especially difficult light. I was working on a dog series. I had for years, I worked on dogs on the streets of the world, which actually shortly after that shot, I had enough pictures for a book, and I have a book on dogs. And so I was still collecting. So of course I couldn't pass that opportunity. I saw this dog sitting in the light, but then everything behind the dog is deep shadows. And then the owner, maybe, of the dog just a little further down the street, sitting on, I don't know, a chair, a bench, who knows? We don't see anything. We only see the legs
No, we can
coming out
guess
in
what
the
he's
light.
doing. I mean, he could be reading a book. I mean, it might be the perfect follow on from the lady in the bar reading the book.
Could be.
Yeah.
So all we
don't
have
know.
are legs.
Yeah.
And so it's the dogs and then the mystery man.
Well, this week we're talking about difficult light, and it doesn't come much harder than waiting for something to happen in a sliver or slither of light.
That was August 2022.
Right.
And I had arrived in Copenhagen the day or two before the workshop. And I had just arrived. My hotel at happy hour. So I was standing outside, having a drink, talking with other people. And of course, I'm in Copenhagen in a hotel, but then who are the first two people that approach me are two Americans. and so we're having a conversation and blah, 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 talking. And then as we're talking, I'm always scanning around me and I have my camera on my shoulder, although I'm having a drink. And I see this light across the kitty corner, across the street. And then keep looking at it and I see the sliver of light getting narrower and narrower. And they're super talkative people. And I'm like, how am I going to get away without being rude? And then I just did it. I just left them. I just set my glass down. I said, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Light's calling.
Is that what you literally said?
Sorry, I gotta
go. Light's calling.
And I just left them there, in mid conversation and then went across the street. I literally had seconds left, but there is, if anyone's been to Copenhagen, they know that there's constant stream of people bicycling. And so I figured it's only going to be a matter of time till someone comes through that light on a bicycle. And I waited. A few people went by, and then this beautiful young woman just looking up, because a lot of people are looking down on their bike. So that wouldn't have been a very good shot. Or somebody wearing a helmet wasn't going to be a great shot. So I really wanted to capture something special that really set Copenhagen. And then she went by and was looking up. She's not looking at me, but she's looking into the light.
She's looking across.
And then I snapped it. So everything else is quite dark except for that sliver of light.
So waiting for a sliver of light can be quite an exciting thing, can't it? Waiting for something.
It is.
Waiting for a story to fall within it.
It is. And I would have normally been there a little bit earlier, just to get to do the measurements, say, okay, where do they have to be to get to be in the best light? And then so you kind of adjust your own position on the sidewalk. You kind of let a few people go by to make those adjustments, like what's going to make the strongest possible photograph. But I did not have that time. And so by the time I got there, again, it was just seconds, and I got this shot. And then I went back and I found my two
American friends. You see, all's well that ends well. Now, I thought since we didn't have a regular, he says with air quotes, show last week where we would set an assignment, that since you were on this week, and this week has a theme of photographing on the street, generally through the show, it might be a nice idea if you could set the assignment. What's this month's assignment going to be?
Well, it is what a lot of people would consider difficult light. So just make it work for you. Harsh shadows, bright highlights, a rim light. I mean, silhouettes, but silhouettes are actually pretty easy to do. But like rim light, like the woman on the first picture that we saw today, or really embracing deep shadows and bright highlights, and try to make a compelling photograph. So don't be afraid. Well, then again, if it's, I know you guys had a stretch of rain in the northern
did we?
part of Northern Europe. So hopefully that's done with, because I think we could do rain for another time. I think we should really focus on harsh light and shadows.
We're not asking you in particular to go look for a rim light. We're not asking you to go and look for harsh shadow, but we're asking you to go and look for something that is clearly difficult light. Can I say one thing in the meantime? You need a new T-shirt for your crew when you go walking. I like the idea of, hold on, light cooling.
Good luck with your assignment. You've got slightly less time this month because we're 1 week into August already. Difficult light? Challenge yourself with those 2 words. I said I had a sort of postscript to Less Enlightened Times, and I haven't forgotten. And it follows last week's show, the Extra Mile special, which we played on the Photowalk, as it were. And I was hoping it wouldn't be too self-indulgent, but I told the story. I replayed just part of the story of searching for my birth mum. And I made a photo story of my visit to a graveyard on the Kent coast. It was a very windswept day when I went and made that story. And that's myself and my next door neighbour Chris, who's good with all this ancestry stuff, still trying to piece together my birth family story and my story and the names on the gravestones, which I found. One of which possibly, because it was my original birth name, Stephen, possibly is on the gravestone. There's a could be, may not be about that part of the story, although the plot thickens a bit, actually, because it's been in the news a little bit this week on this side of the pond in the UK, but in 2021, ITV, our independent television company, they started to investigate the following, and this once more talks of, less enlightened times, which was not really that long ago. I mean, my kids would think it was eons ago. But no, if you think about the 60s and 70s, no, it wasn't long ago when being a single parent was considered, there's something not right about that. I'm sorry, I tell you what, let's take your children away from you and we'll let them go and find proper families, he says with inverted commas and a big wince as I say so. And they're investigating this, I'll quote actually this story. The Human Rights Committee is strongly advising the government to apologise for the treatment of unmarried mothers whose babies were taken away between 1949 and 1976, which I am not necessarily in the middle of, but in that time period. It's believed 500,000 British women were persuaded to give their babies up for adoption when they didn't want to in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Campaigners from the Movement for an Adoption Apology want the government to acknowledge many women have been coerced or were coerced into giving up their babies against their will and apologise. Fat chance of that, I should think. Those women have lived with a heartache ever since, and many never saw their children again, and now it's becoming, from some thoughts and some work, a possible part of my story as well. But as kind of a postscript on last week's show. Anyway, for fear of oversharing now, let me do a little more, he says with a glint in his eye. We talk a lot about the why of photography on this show. It's not always the why of photography. It can be the why of you and your existence, why you do things, what moves you as a human. And I think you can expect that as a payoff question today, particularly when talking to a thinker like Ian Howarth, that's for sure. But I had a why sent to me this week, and I've received a few of yours of late. So thank you so much for them. And this why came as a link to a personal blog. It's a story from one of our very cherished extra milers, Tim Binder. I often mention Tim when I talk about taking and I'm taking this on my worldly trips, Tim, taking my X Pro 1 with my vintage lens that you kindly gifted me a couple of years ago now. But Tim has attempted his why, which I'm going to link to on the show page. But I'm going to read a slightly shorter, slightly abridged version here. The whys you send are very precious, particularly since I intend for that to be the very first Photowalk book this coming winter. The Book of Why, perhaps needing a different title because I suspect there is a Book of Why somewhere. And I don't know if it's because walking is just a great time for thinking, or that photography is equally just a great time for thinking, or just being creative makes us the more thinky type, if there's such a thing. But Tim was this was a really good insight into your why, and one that I felt was full of vulnerability, particularly when I'm not going to read this bit out, but if you read the whole piece, which the link will take you to, you'll read Tim's thoughts about vulnerability and family. At age 55, says Tim, I'm still trying to figure out my purpose in life. Defining my why is part of that journey. I have a good job that I like, but it doesn't define me. It's not my so-called calling, but I work hard, and leave work when I log off. My focus is on my why in life outside of work. Back in 2019, I wrote a blog about my legacy. Many of the questions I had then, I still have now. Since I wrote that, I've survived the COVID-19 pandemic, a heart attack, the passing of my mother, my son moving out of the house, a stomach cancer scare, and a 50-pound weight loss. My mental health journey has vastly improved, but it's still not great. So what is my why? I must start with my wife and son. For Marcy, I do everything I can to make her happy, support her best I can, support her emotionally when I'm not battling my own internal demons. And I feel my why truly comes from two things: my photography and my writing. These are the only things I can control, the only things uniquely my own. As I grow and learn and practice my photography, I feel I'm getting better at it. My psychologist has always tried to get me to say my work is great, but I'm not sure I can ever feel that way. I have, however, compromised. I do admit that some of my pictures are good. The why of my photography, though, is the fact that I will have some pictures to share later on in my life. I shoot only for myself and what I want. There's a connection to today's conversation with Ian Howarth, actually. And a bonus is that, well, some others enjoy them as well. A few people even purchase them. I don't display them in galleries. I don't sell them for high prices. But what an honor when somebody buys a print for their home or their office. My goal when I go to shoot is to share the beauty I recognize in the world. That is why I do it. When it comes to writing, people have praised me for my vulnerability, my honesty, my willingness to share. But my why is this exercise. I'll not change the world. I'll not cure cancer. I'll not star in a great movie or save somebody's life. But if my photography or blog posts help one person or bring at least one person joy, then my why has been defined and fulfilled. And that was absolutely beautiful, Tim. It really was. I hope I've done it justice by reading it. Sometimes I wonder when I read things and put my personality into your letters, because that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm trying to provide your voice when I'm reading. And so I do hope that I do them justice. Tim, it was a wonderful piece that you wrote about your why. It really was. And do go and follow that link. There is more. I've read a fair proportion of it. I say abridged. It's not. It's not entirely. I've read quite a lot of it. I wanted to for the context, but there is more for you to read. And on that note, I want to return to the second part of my conversation with my guest this week, who is the documentary photographer Ian Howarth. Not to be confused, by the way, with the photographer of the same name in Manchester, who's more in the social arena. And in this part, let's start with talking about projects and the country kind of silence projects that Ian made about his own identity, of how moving to settle in a new country, being displaced in many ways, some ways, has had a profound effect upon how he sees and what fascinates him, what visually stirs him, what he's drawn to, which is, and I know this is a phrase oft used, but I think it's completely appropriate, the extraordinarily ordinary, quite often. But it's how you see it, what you do with it when you photograph it, that I think makes Ian Howarth such an incredible documentary photographer. Here's part two.
In A Country Kind of Silence, one of my favourite pictures is, and it won't be everybody's, I'm sure, the two vans absolutely consumed by the vegetation. And that might be because whenever I go somewhere on my walks and I see something consumed by vegetation, I thought, well, how long's that been there? When was the last time that was used? Who was the last person to get out of the van? What's in the back of the van?
Exactly.
All those questions, and probably a good 2 sheets of A4 more. That's what I'm thinking, and I'm thinking that's what you might be thinking when you see something like that, because to some people, and I'll be careful in the way I say this, I mean, your inquisitive nature to them is, well, it's just two unloved vans left to rot. What's to photograph?
Exactly, and I couldn't agree more. I do have all of those questions, and more probably. I do. I think about all of these things. I like to enjoy all of the scenes that I see away from looking through my viewfinder. I like to just be there and absorb it and really enjoy it as just a tourist, I guess, and really allow it to affect me in some way. And that's been the case for a long time, especially the further afield I've gone away from where I live. I began in Sussex, but then I went to Kent, and then from Kent I went to Essex, and then from Essex I went to Norfolk, and then from Norfolk I went across to Gloucestershire and so on and so forth. So, the more you expand, the more you see that there's commonality in all of these things. These are just not one-off things, and you're just kind of like experiencing a lot more, and then you begin to build a bit of a narrative around these things. And I think that's the strength of traveling a bit more. It's the more you see, the more it feels like it isn't just a single image. I like to think that the images in the book, for example, they feel like they exist in the same world. I don't know if I've been successful in that. I feel like they do. I mean, that's because I've shot them, so maybe I am biased. But the whole point is that they're meant to exist in the same world that I've kind of not created, but that I've kind of given you.
And I will mention, and I'll make no apologies, it is from Sean's film, and I remember you starting to talk about it, and I thought, I want to see the picture. It's the Beachy Head, and we've talked about Beachy Head on this program recently, actually for quite sinister reasons, with one of our guests who walked Beachy Head for the reason that you were mentioning, of it being one of the number one spots in the UK for people who take their lives. And maybe he walked past that phone box. I don't know. But that phone box in that picture, and I hope you don't mind me asking you to re-step those steps for us. Because again, to some people, it's a phone box next to a seat, but it's not, is it?
No. It's much more than that. And the day that I photographed that, I was with a very good friend of mine, and we just went on a walk, and I kind of knew that we were going via there. I know that coastline very, very well from Seaford to Eastbourne. It's it's an area that I do know quite well. But I didn't know that area specifically around Beachy Head all that well. And it was a beautiful summer's day, and we were making our way towards Eastbourne to then get the train back to Brighton. Yeah. And it was just there. I think my friend Robin went to the toilet, and I was just kind of waiting, and it was just kind of there in front of me under the most kind of perfect light. It was really beautiful. And the first thing that struck me was, my God, this phone box is clearly like a mid-90s kind of BT phone box, So I wonder what kind of conversations have been had in there, before people had mobile phones en masse, I do wonder about that. And maybe even people kind of in a more contemporary sense, maybe the people that were thinking of taking their own lives, maybe they just left everything at home, as a way to, just travel light, like keys, all of that is just all details now, if you're thinking about doing this. So, even up until recently, maybe this phone box, had been used at some point. So it really struck me. And I think that's why I've used that image as an example of this ambiguity that I often talk about, because it's not a traditionally beautiful image. It is just a phone box, and it's scratched up, I think there's a certain degree of romance to the image. You have the bench, and you have the little post box on the left-hand side, and you have a little kind of green bush, and then obviously you have the sky. And what people don't know is that, beyond that little bush on the other side of the road is just the sea. That's the fall right there. Yes. It is literally just there. So the proximity to it is again, quite an impact to me. And I think one of those frustrating things is that you can't make that obvious to people. Certain images do have a hidden secrets. And unless I was to talk about each one of them, you might not know a lot of these secrets. But I think for me, even without the Beachy Head and the tragedy of Beachy Head, I think that image still represents some of the ambiguity that I'm talking about, at least from a visual point of view. It's like you have a phone box, it's not particularly attractive, but the light is really, really pretty, and you have some traditional kind of beauty tropes, a pretty sky, a blue sky, and some nice foliage. But thank you for bringing that up.
It's interesting in that respect. Text is not something that it didn't feature in Arcadia.
No.
When you write your Instagram posts, I note that there's not often much text. and there's certainly not many hashtags. You let people make their own mind up, and
I mean, I think for many years, people would ask me, like, if I was doing an interview or an article or a magazine or something, people would ask me for an image of me, and I'm like, no, you don't get an image of me. I'm not important in this process. I'm just a person doing this. What's important is the work, and I always want that to be the focus. And I mean this kind of a bit tongue in cheek. Obviously, we have talked about equipment and whatnot, but I think the less you say about the making of something, I think the more intrigue it has. And I think the more power it has. Things like locations and what camera and what film you shot, this is all in the real world. You don't, these are crude things. I find you're trying to make something here that if people are just going to have an emotional response to. As soon as you start making it real or too real, it takes some of the sheen away from it. Things like locations, time of day, all of this is just detail.
Oh God! I hope I'm not going to be clumsy now when I say.
Oh no!
I'm certainly not going to.
I'm obviously being slightly facetious.
I'm not going to ask you for your photo, but actually, no. You've made me think about something, and looking at your colour work of people, which show imperfection, which are motion blurred sometimes. Sometimes there's sort of is this the right word? Ethereal nature to them, almost.
Yeah.
And that probably fits into what falls beautifully into what you're just saying, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like things that ask questions but give you no answers. That's basically what I want. As soon as you start kind of having to answer questions about stuff, it just kind of takes away from it. But I'm the same with my consuming of photography. I'm exactly the same. So this is not something that I'm being kind of like, oh, when it comes to my work, I don't want to tell you anything, but I want to ask a million questions to anyone else, I never ask about process, even to photographers that I've got a lot of friends that are photographers, and I never ask them any questions. No. I don't want to know. I don't want to know where or how. For me, it's just like, you've given us this amazing thing that I'm going to interpret how I want to interpret it.
Oh my word! I'm going to have to tiptoe really carefully now. Then,
no, it's fine,
because I do want to ask about Makeout City. But
oh no! To be honest with you, Makeout City, I've answered so many questions.
I know you have. But I'm going to ask.
It's absolutely fine.
I'm going to ask. Well, I was thinking for a minute, were you telling me you can't, but do you know, Makeout City is a really important picture to you. It's actually quite recently featured again in your Insta feed as well. The story behind it I like. You didn't originally that wasn't a picture you saw one day and just happened to capture in a reportage style. So, no. But it actually heralds from a job where you were shooting a wedding, and I thought, I didn't know that. I don't know why I didn't have you pegged, and as like I am, a shooter of weddings. I'm not sure how many you do, or if you do any more, whether that was a one-off.
No,
I don't know.
I haven't done weddings in a very, very long time.
Okay, but the interesting thing is, we were talking, and I think you mentioned his name just now, William Eggleston. That's right, William Eggleston. He shot a couple of weddings. I think you would be somebody I would choose to shoot my wedding as William Eggleston, because when Eggleston turned up, he spent his time shooting the ashtrays. And I have a feeling that's what Ian Howarth would do if I asked you to come and shoot my wedding, which of course has already been done. So with due respect to my wife,
in the next life maybe. I mean, I used to do a lot of weddings, and at the beginning of my video career, I think it was just something that I did, to make money, and it was good, but it's very time consuming. I have nothing but respect for people that shoot weddings. I think it's a lovely thing that you're doing for people that want a very special day in their lives captured. But I think for me, once I began to shoot with a bit more purpose in terms of the work that I wanted to create, I found it too time consuming, and I just couldn't do both. And I just chose, and that's kind of how it went. But there was a period where I was doing weddings, and Makeout City came by pure chance. I think I was on a bus or a train or something. I think I was on a bus, and
it's another one of your loo stories, isn't it? Trying to find the loo.
Right? Yeah, it was just trying to find a loo, and this was in Lewis, and I went up the stairs, and I really needed the toilet, and I ran upstairs. Didn't even look at what I was passing by, and I came down the stairs when I felt like I had a bit more time to have a look.
Yeah.
I just noticed this beautiful kind of location,
Yes,
I mean, more beautiful to me at least.
Yeah.
And the light was amazing. The textures were good. There was nothing out of place. You didn't really have to think too carefully about your framing, in terms of framing things out that were taken away from the illusion of the shot.
Yeah.
It was just really wonderful. But I knew that I couldn't just shoot an empty place. So at the time I was doing a lot of kind of not experimental, but I was experimenting a lot with portraiture and shooting people in a way that I wanted to. And it just felt right to get 2 people involved that I knew, that I had been shooting with already. So I actually had it all kind of planned out. I kind of knew what I needed to do. It's one of the few shoots that I've ever done that I actually knew exactly what I wanted. The framing is something that I did on the day, but in terms of what I wanted them to do, it's exactly what I wanted, and it's still a very, very special shot to me. I personally just love the shot.
It's a beautiful shot.
I've seen it so much, and having to print it and send it and edit it, I feel slightly desensitized to it sometimes.
I understand what you mean by it. It's a beautiful shot. Being published in places like the New York Times, the Guardian, so on and so forth. It's nice that you're saying it's nice that, which is a
and it's nice that it's nice that. Yes,
nice that.
It's been online as well, I think.
Yeah.
I don't remember when.
These feel like real I've arrived statements in some respects. Has your success surprised you? Because whenever I've seen you talk, you seem, and even now as we're having a chat, you seem somewhat surprised by all the fuss.
I mean, I'll never feel like I've arrived, really. I think it's not something that you really think about that much. I've had these conversations a lot over the last year and stuff with various people, and people's experience of being a photographer, being a successful photographer is very different. I admire certain photographers who hate their own work and they admire you back, and you're like, what's going on here? Like, is everything just a dream? Yeah. Nothing makes sense anymore, But I think for me, I just love doing this. I love doing it, and all I want is to be able to continue doing it. That's all I want. I don't really think much past that. Yeah. For me, photography is the end of the road. There's nothing beyond it. Yeah, I need to make a living. That's fine. And you know what it's like, when you got £10 in your pocket, you won 20, and when you got 20, you won 40. I think that applies to everybody. But I think in terms of what makes me happy and makes me tick, I think photography is the end of the road. I don't see photography as a way to make money so I can buy a boat or a nice car or anything. If I can, great. But that's not why I'm like, if I can't do those things, I'll continue to do it, and I'll continue to do it happily.
So how important is, say, audience?
I've learned a lot about the art world over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's, in many ways, you have to not be interested in what they want because you want to make the work that you want to do. But at the same time, your audience are the people that are going to buy your books or buy a print off you, so they're incredibly important, and I place a lot of importance in that, and people that want to ask me questions on Instagram or via email, I always endeavor to answer questions, as long as they're not about locations and stuff, but if it's anything else, I'm more than happy to chat, and I love chatting about photography, it's great, The audience is very, very important, but not necessarily in terms of giving people what they want. I want to make the work that I want to make. And then if it lands, great. Or if you get a new audience, then also great. Because sometimes not saying that you get bored by your own work, but you want to be challenged. You might come back to some work. You want to move forward and try to feel like you're progressing in the way that you want to progress. I think self-realization is one of the most important things. If you think of something and you want to do it, it's going to take a lot to remove that thought from your head. If you try it and then hate it, that's fine. At least now the thought is out of your head. But if you don't do something, it's going to haunt you. So I think for me, I want to pursue these avenues. And if it takes me somewhere completely left field, then so be it. I think that's for me the biggest challenge in being a photographer is always feeling like you're doing the work that you want to do.
I'm going to be nervously cautious in asking this and finally question, because I think you might have already answered it actually a couple of questions back, but I'll have another go.
Yeah, it's fine.
Just in case there's something, and I've got a feeling there might be with you some other nugget of something in terms.
I'm intrigued by this question.
I know.
Now.
I probably sold it too much. Now it's going to
be really building it up.
I know. I should never. You should never do this. I told you. I mean, my school of journalism and being an interviewer, I don't think I passed with flying colours. Look, what is your why? What is it? I mean, I think you've said what drives you each day, and that's my problem a little bit. But I really want to drill down a bit more what Ian Howarth's why is, and that could be a life why as much as anything, because you're a thinker. You are a thinker.
Yeah, I overthink far too much. You're trying to get me to think even more now. What is my why? I think I know, but I'm really hesitant. I feel like this is the when someone puts a gun to your head moment, like what would you say if someone put a gun to your head? I think being
God, I hope it doesn't feel
no,
like that.
No, it's not. But what I mean when the chips are down is like, what's the answer kind of thing, and I think I'm just a very, very inquisitive person, and I think because of the life that I've had, I'm just very interested in this world. I'm just fascinated by it, and sometimes I'm fascinated by people and what they've got to say, and sometimes I'm not really fascinated by what they've got to say, but I'm still fascinated about people. People often say about my work, it's like, oh, you don't take that many portraits, and I'm like, you tell me how one portrait can tell you more about this bench or this used phone box on Beachy Head or whatever it might be. It doesn't always. You just want to see more people in my shots, kind of thing. So for me, I think it's a constant kind of like wanting to know why. At this point in my career, with this book that I have, I think it's kind of almost, can we have a conversation about these things, just things rather than people? No one's telling you anything. A portrait's not someone telling you anything. It's just a portrait of a person, right? So for me, it's like, how do these things tell us things? And I think I want to do that in the whole world if I could. I want to just go and see and try to understand how is this different to what I know, and how much I will learn through that process. Being in Peru, I learned something, and then being in Miami, it didn't mean that I unlearned what I learned in Peru, but I learned how it's different, and then I learned why it's different. And then coming to England, I learned, it's like, why is everything so close together? Why they always complaining that there's no space? There's acres of space. And then you begin to understand kind of how England developed to where we are now, and how we've kept a lot of those ways of thinking, in terms of not expanding in the same way that they do in America, for example. So these are all the things that we learn as we go along. And I think for me, I can scale that forever. I wouldn't have enough in 3 or 4 lifetimes to do that. That's what makes me tick. And I think photography, it almost gives you a record of it. There's something tangible. I mean, with film, something tangible that you can hold at the end of it. And I like that, being able to revisit that, and have like a document almost that shows that process. And I think that's my why, my where, and my what.
And my sincere thanks to Ian Howarth today. I will have links to his website, which of course will also link to his book. It's interesting, well, it is to me, how sometimes serendipity strikes, or coincidence perhaps, maybe it's that. But Valerie today talked about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary as she went to the bathroom in a pub, didn't she? Seeing a scene or a person, making sure you photograph them or plan for something on the way back. And Ian, well, he did do the same thing, didn't he? In that story about a picture called Makeout City. Two stories that suggest the most incredible things that happen on the way to or back from the bathroom, which is a very ordinary existence, isn't it? Very strange thing to be struck by, Neil. Yes, I appreciate that, but let me make a picture and move on. I've not made a lot of pictures, a lot of sketchbooks today. There's a lot of pictures to see on the website, so I feel my job has been done by you today. But if sketchbooking our lives is part of what the programme is about, I want to definitely include mine. 280th shutter speed. Oh, it's getting a bit dark. Where's the sunshine gone? Hello? Knock, knock, knock. You promised me blue skies today. F4, 160 ISO. There we go. Another sketchbooking picture for today. If you can't wait till next Friday and want to walk a little further together, then the Extra Mile edition number 49 in the series is waiting for you now. Whether you choose to walk more over the next day or the weekend, or maybe you'll save it to some stage during the week, the Extra Mile is part of our private Patreon channel, where our wonderful community of walkers and supporters and photographers who want to help keep this podcast here week after week make a modest, generous monthly or annual contribution, starting at as little as £3 per month. That's less than a Sunday newspaper, for heaven's sakes. And there's no columnist to upset you here either. This week, Glenn Shepherd joins me to talk about being a CSI photographer, crime scenes investigator photography, this is. Is it like the movies depict? Well, we'll find out with Glenn. And Valerie returns to share a little more about difficult lights with a lovely story from Paris. Plus, I have some thoughts about dealing with the stress and the anxiety we can sometimes feel as photographers.
On this week's Extra Mile,
You really have to focus on noticing things that other people wouldn't generally notice. When you get to that sort of level of investigation, when we're approaching these crime scenes,
I think every opportunity is amazing. To me, just a flat light, what people would consider easy light, is boring.
look up. I always tell people to look up. Like, look at the ceiling. Can't remember how many times we've looked up and found, spatter on the ceiling, blood spatter on the ceiling, or other things. Or just think outside the box. Think the way that what you think the path the criminals followed and what they've done, and think more laterally.
There was scaffolding on the Eiffel Tower that year, so you could not even get a clean shot if you wanted to. So I had to position the toy on the wall, and I focused on the toy, and then the real thing was behind it, out of focus.
The first 5 minutes of the show is available for free, so click on the link on the website for the Extra Mile. It's called Support the Show. That link, the orange button, just there. That's the one. Perfect. Also, the invites have just gone out for the monthly In Vision Zoom show, Tuesday, 5th of September. Our PS to the show is about to come, but before that, a play-out song just to make some final frames to, or think about what's being said today. And it's from Narrow Skies, a song called Season of Gold. It's a very ethereal, dreamlike quality that this song has. It's a husband and wife duo, and I do enjoy their music. And they write about social injustice in their work, which has been a theme of part of the show today. So here is Narrow Skies, and after this, we'll close with a postscript to the show.
We walked that season of gold. I'd walk it again with you. Clouded moments, hazy pictures in my mind. I've seen this moment before. Can I go there again with you? Reminisce of where time stands still. pictures in my mind. And as the season turns cold, I do it all again with you. Distant memories.
Narrow skies and season of gold. This show is really made by and from the letters you write in. You gently guide the direction, which I'm continually grateful for. So please don't stop writing. I'm going to step outside my English self-deprecatory upbringing now and say that it genuinely moves me when I get letters that say, please don't stop recording. But actually, to turn that on its head, please don't stop writing, because it's your stories that make all the difference. Talking of which, the pictures we reference and some links will be on the show page today. Just a few closing thank you very much, Liz, before the PS. My sincere thank you to you if you are or about to become an extra miler. My promise to you is we'll keep building a community of kindness, a safe place to share our thoughts about this thing that we love, photographing and walking. And my thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell and Emily Renier, who look after our Facebook members. Right, a postscript for the day. Today it's from Albert Einstein. We are raising the bar with this one, obviously. Hashtag be as astute as Albert. I wonder, I really do, by the way, what the great thinkers, and today has very much been a show about thinking, I have mused, what the great thinkers might have made of hashtagging. Can you imagine Marcus Aurelius in AD 140 speaking to a wise and learned council in the great city of Rome? Friends, I begin to speak only when I'm certain what I'll say isn't better left unsaid. There we go. Hashtag that one up and stick it on my TikTok, would you? Anyway, the PS for today. As an aeroplane breaks the very silence that I really like when I'm reading these PSs, should I re-record this bit, or is this what's called authenticity? It's authenticity, Neil. Let it go over. Is it a Cessna? I've no idea. I can't see through the canopy of the trees. I don't know. Not sure at all. Anyway, the PS for today has to be about being curious, doesn't it? And in Einstein's case, I might add the adjective brilliant, or brilliantly curious. That is an adjective, isn't it? I don't have to melt under my desk into a syrupy pool of please don't ask me so unworthiness again, do I? I do hope not. So the PS today is from Albert Einstein. I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious. Talk to you as we walk the extra mile.
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.